Hey, and welcome. Welcome, everybody, to the second Decrypting Crypto webinar. I didn't actually think we'd make it this far. Thank you very much for making it possible. This is the utility conversation. I'm Lindsay Shooters, journalist at Business Maverick, and the editor of the Crypto Corner newsletter. And I know that I'm guilty of framing crypto as a speculative investment or a store of value asset. But today we want to move beyond that, beyond the hype of the marketplace, and talk about the real world use. For that, I've invited Larry Cook, Africa Head of Legal for Binance, and Herman Vivier, Board Chairman of Surfer Kids and Bitcoin Kasi, to mine their brains for insight about the things that I'm not quite that sure about. So let's start with the core topic. When we say crypto utility, what does that actually mean in a tangible South African context? Let's move past the jargon. Herman, from your perspective, on the ground, in communities, what does utility look like?
Yeah, how's it, man? Thanks for having me. Yeah, utility. If I could just quickly comment on something that intros that conversation. I think when we talk about utility, we have to remember why we are all here. At least speaking for myself, why am I here? Utility as a second layer conversation. The first layer conversation is the ideology. And for me personally, I came into this for ideological reasons and utility as the everyday application, but I constantly refer back to the ideological question. And the reason I'm here is for the separation of money and state. It's that simple. That's been the case since the very beginning. And so I always have to tie utility back to that. If my utility application of this thing loses sight of that core question, then I'm not doing it right. So that being said, separation of money and state, everything else I say always refers back to that. So as it goes for daily utility, I mean, look, as far as I'm concerned, I want to be able to do everything I do with normal money. I want to be able to do that with Bitcoin. And I want to do that in the simplest, most straightforward way possible. And I want to be able to help other people do it without having to give them 3 books to read and without needing them to have a master's degree in computer science in order to understand what they're doing. So it's about simplicity, it's about practical education, and it's about doing this responsibly. And unfortunately, there's been quite a lack. Well, I want to choose my words carefully, but there's been a lack of responsibility in the space in general. And as we've gone through the cycles, hype cycle after hype cycle after hype cycle, a lot of people have burned their fingers. And so when we talk about utility, we have to bring responsibility into that conversation as well. It's like, you can't give a 3-year-old a firearm and have a conversation about utility. Like, you got to talk about responsibility first, right? So, yeah, it's, I mean, we can get into the practical stuff later on, but for me, that's how I'd like to frame the conversation.
Okay, that's a nice opening gambit. I mean, I've myself been in your crosshairs for the irresponsible side. Some of my oversimplifications have erred on almost untruths. So yeah, I'm all about spreading knowledge about that, and that's why having resources like you on these kinds of platforms is vital. Moving to you, Larry, from the viewpoint of like a major exchange, how do you define utility for everyday South Africans? And what are the key functions you're trying to enable beyond just buying and selling like Bitcoin? Like, I know Herman is a Bitcoin maximalist. He doesn't like the crypto thing.
To say it lightly.
Yeah. But yeah, like where's a platform like Binance at, and what does that mean for South Africa?
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay, for having us, and Herman as well for the insights to have this conversation. I think Herman's picking on a topic, started with something like from a philosophical perspective. We probably need a whole podcast separate just to break down those ideologies and discuss the different players in school of thoughts from that perspective. But I'll keep it really simple, right? And I kind of want to attach it to my journey in terms of finding myself in Binance. I was on the other side of the world. I was in the working for the South African Reserve Bank. So we were trying to regulate at that point in time before I obviously jumped over this side. So it's given me a good balanced view in terms of what does utility at least look like from various different players. And something that I've kind of separated in my mind is that there's personal utility and then there's general utility.
Yeah.
And what I mean by personal utility, that's where we all have ecosystems within our own lifestyle in terms of how we manage our funds, how we manage our money. You find people have 4 different credit cards. On one credit card, you have 3 different accounts in terms of what money you use, how you save. So you kind of create your personal use case or your use ecosystem for how you want to distribute and maximize your money. And especially with like discounts, we're also in an era where we chasing discounts with reward partners, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So all of that kind of mixes into this part of how do I find utility? And again, what you're trying to solve for is actually efficiencies. How do I get the most out of my money? How do I make it simpler, better, faster? As Herman was also alluding to, the simplicity of money, but also understanding that money is not the only exchange of value, right? Because I think sometimes we bring the conversation about crypto, but too close to money, and we kind of start losing the fundamentals of what crypto is versus what legal tender is. Because when you start talking to the regulators, those conversations are very different. And you need to obviously be able to explain the use case as from an exchange perspective, from a custody holder perspective, and all the various stakeholders in the crypto economy. The general case of utility, stepping away from the personal side, is obviously like how do you use your crypto? And I think Herman's example of the Bitcoin economy and ecosystem, which we'll get into, is a clear example of that. I want to be able to get paid to cut my hair, buy clothes, get food, groceries, whatever the case might be. And I want to be able to seamlessly do that in the most efficient way for my personal self. So that obviously requires more merchants adopting crypto payment systems or integrations, allowing people to use whatever means that they would prefer, because that's I think that's some of the conversation around utility. You're trying to increase inclusivity, and I'll give that financial freedom, so to say, and that's one of our slogans, the freedom of money. Give the freedom to the consumer so they can be in control of their assets. You mentioned about functions. What other functions we want to do. I kind of want to replace functions with facilitation, and I think the three things I would say as an exchange we try to facilitate, and this is me just interpreting it as my own, is really we're trying to create curiosity. I think you need to, and then that's where that philosophical conversation we probably can bookmark for next time. You need to create that curiosity. You need to get people to look at it in a deep without the stereotypes that's attached to crypto. Because that's unfortunately something that blurs people's experience. And we just always try and create that curiosity to say, come and see what crypto is for yourself. Don't listen to what your friend told you, or maybe take it with a pinch of salt, but come and see it for yourself. That's the first thing. The second thing we try and facilitate is community. Learn from each other. I mean, if you look at the traditional fiat system, banking system, you don't really have a community unless you have like stokvels, etc. in our economy, where people actually sit together and say, how do we talk about money? What does money look like? How do we build on money that makes sense for all of us? So we obviously try and drive community so that there's knowledge share, there's education and everything that comes with that, and also builds with use cases for utility, because in the community, you'll find that somebody's selling a product, somebody's trying to start a business. This is a great platform, or at least another avenue or channel for you to diversify and give your business an edge if you want to get into the space. And you don't have to even be in the crypto space for you to integrate with one of the crypto payment channels like Binance Pay, BPay. And then I think that the last point, which kind of converges with all this point, is creativity. We always try and facilitate creativity. A lot of the times people forget that, this space is based on innovation, on strong technologies, so, and it's still a very infant, it's in its infant stage, right? So there's still new products that's going to be created. There's still new use case applications that's going to be created. And that's something that we always want to stimulate. So I'll pause there for now. I think and hand it over to you.
Yeah, I think we just need to like just take a step back. Like when I say utility, I mean how can you use crypto every day, almost like fiat currency. So like the rands that's in your wallet right now, I don't have any cash. I haven't carried cash in a very long time. But how can you use it in that kind of context? And on that, there's a vital question here coming through the chat. Paul with three L's. Maybe that's Paul. What supports the value of crypto and why is it so volatile, which makes it so risky? I'm going to push this to you, Herman, because you out there in the community onboarding people with the idea of, let's just reframe it as Bitcoin. Let's start there because I'm also a believer that it is the one true cryptocurrency. How do you explain the value, the underlying value of Bitcoin?
Well, money has value because it's a neutral form of value exchange. That's essentially what gives. I mean, there's a couple of things that there's 6 or 7 different properties that money has to have to function as good money, and one of those things is that you can't change the underlying rules of whichever ledger it is that you're using to exchange value. So this is one of the reasons why it's illegal to fire up a money printer in your own garage. It's called forgery. If everyone did that, money would lose value because it's it messes with the scarcity element. So the thing that gives Bitcoin value is the fact that it is decentralized and it cannot be changed willy-nilly by anybody. Like there's no corporation, there's no organization, there's no board of directors, there's no CEO. Satoshi, threw the code out onto the internet, and from about 2011, 2012 onwards, he walked away, and other people took the project over. And by the time people realized that this thing has value, the cat was out of the bag, and nobody could take back control of the project. And so it's properly decentralized in the way that there's no single entity, whether that's a group of people or a single person that can exercise any leverage over the network and its underlying rules. And that's what gives its value. It's the price of Bitcoin is a speculative exercise. People will buy and sell it on a daily basis, and the price will go up and down because of that. But I don't look at the price when I'm trying to determine the value of Bitcoin. I look at the stability of the network, and the network stability is incredible. It's, as far as I'm concerned, Bitcoin is by far the most stable thing that I can think of. It does the same thing every single day, day in and day out, and it's been doing that for 16 years. Approximately every 10 minutes, there's a new block mined. It follows exactly the same rules as the previous block, and nobody can change it. And that's what makes money. If something could change overnight, it wouldn't be money. And so that's what gives its value. And I think that's probably one of the most important things to think about when you're trying to evaluate this thing or whatever it is. So yeah, I don't know if you want to move. I mean, I see a bunch of questions in the chat, but
before we get into the taxation thing,
which I'm going to kick them.
which I'm going to kick to Larry. I just want to talk through like just some of like your Bitcoin Ikasi work. Like if you don't know, as far as I know, it started like as one beach out in Mossel Bay, and then the project kind of grew, and now it's like taking hold of the entire garden route. That's just an oversimplification. Could you just briefly tell us like why you chose to build that circular economy? And then like what is a Bitcoin circular economy?
Okay, let me try and answer that as succinctly as possible. So I'll try and take as little time as possible.
No worries.
So the reason we did that, and this is again coming back to the opening thing I said about ideology and utility. The reason we started this project is an ideological reason. I became frustrated in 2020 after having spent years obsessing over this thing. I became frustrated that there wasn't more everyday utility. Where I went through the ICO cycle in 2017. The early altcoin cycle in 2013, then NFTs started popping up in 2021, and as far as I could tell, it was all just hype and pie in the sky, and I didn't really see daily application. Like, are we actually using this thing to buy bread and milk and using it for the same things that we use normal money? And if we want Bitcoin to succeed, Because Bitcoin can change the world for the better. If we take the ability to print money away from large governments, we will make the world a better place. But if we want that to happen, Bitcoin has to be used as a daily form of money, and it has to be a voluntary exercise. Nobody can be forced into it. It has to be voluntarily adopted. And so for that reason, I took inspiration from a project that was already happening in El Salvador called Bitcoin Beach. And we basically just replicated what they did, which is, we did some fundraising in Bitcoin for a local nonprofit organization that I'd been running for more than a decade.
Yeah.
We started paying staff salaries in Bitcoin, and we onboarded local spaza shops in the township to accept Bitcoin as payment, so that the people that we were paying salaries to in Bitcoin could use their salaries as you would use your normal daily wages. And doing this demonstrates the everyday utility of this thing. But it does it for the purpose of getting more people to adopt it and use it in a similar fashion. And ultimately, the purpose behind that is ideological, because there's a reason I want more people to adopt it. It's not just because I want people to play around with this thing and it's fun and that you can do all the stuff with it. The reason I want more people to adopt it, because I think wider adoption will make the world a better place. So we've got, I think today we have 22 staff members working for Bitcoin Ekasi, and we pay 22 salaries, and all our salaries are paid 100% in Bitcoin only. And just to be clear, our project is focused on the townships outside Mossel Bay only. The movement that's taking shape up and down the Garden route is basically, to some extent, people that have taken our model and replicated it in different ways, in Witstrand, in Plettenberg Bay, in the Karoo, in Wilderness. There's about 5 or 6 different towns that are moving in a similar direction, but there's no single person running all those projects. It's a very loose knit organization, and we're just one part of that.
Okay, cool. Now that's an important. I think that just frames kind of the utility conversation very nicely, especially with like onboarding people that communities wouldn't associate with, like access to like digital technologies, and then using all these things. So it's an amazing thing that you're doing. But obviously, when you're talking about utility, you're using crypto, you're moving money around, you're swapping through different coins. There's a tax issue, and Regina asked, I'm going to give you a twofer, Larry. First, Regina asked, the taxation of crypto, please explain where to get a proper tax certificate. Let's just talk through kind of the tax situations, because you understand it better than I do, working with the exchange and on the legal side especially. And then there was a second one about just like the lessons from Mamoabi. What lessons can we take from crypto on expanding usage from the mobile money landscape? Obviously, you working throughout Africa, you coming in contact with like the mobile money, which is big in Kenya, Uganda, spreading all over. Obviously, Binance has an idea of where they want to kind of compete with those platforms and maybe cross-pollinate on those platforms. So yeah, take us through the taxation and then through the mobile money.
Okay, that's a very loaded conversation, but I'll try and be summarized in my response. Tax, I think it's a conversation on its own, but what I can say from Binance's perspective is we do enable tax regimes, because we're a global conglomerate, and we licensed in 23 different jurisdictions. So we also try to understand what are the pain points for regulators. So we've created a tax tool that allows individuals to reconcile let's say they buying and selling, and the exchanges and the transfers of crypto, and basically calculate their own tax that they would then declare to the relevant tax authority, in South Africa, SARS. So we have that tool. It's a value add that we provide for free to all our users that can access it. So please jump onto our website and make use of that. It's not a tax certificate per se, but it's one of the closest things you'll find at this current point in time. I think the question, if I saw it, there was a mention that they use Exodus and they just give them a data dump of like the transactions. So we don't also just do a data dump. We try and make it a bit more intelligible and more usable. But at this point in time, looking at this phase of where we are from an adoption perspective, we haven't gotten to that point in time where, like, your insurance companies and your other financial institutions where you invest in, they give you a tax certificate to say this is how much tax needs to be owed or whatever the case might be. We will hopefully get there soon enough. And that's part of this adoption utility conversation, because the more utility you'll get is from the bigger adoption. And I kind of want to just pivot a bit on, before I get to the second question that you asked about, the competing with mobile monies, is I saw a couple sentiment scores of people not being confident in crypto. Do they trust it, etc. I would honestly say this, being a bit of a skeptic myself, and having been on the other side of the regulator, and this world can seem a bit intimidating. It can seem like there's a lot of uncertainties, but the more you lean into it and the sooner you do it, the better, because you don't want to be in a situation where we're in a volatile world. Like, anything can happen. I mean, you don't want to be in a situation where you're trying to look for an alternative and you're pressed with whatever circumstances you have, and now you're scrambling, trying to find it out, trying to find out alternatives. I would say that you sticking in that space of uncertainty or pessimism is probably one of the disadvantages you're doing to yourself. So I would really encourage those that's in that bracket that are like, I don't want to spoil you guys naysayers, because you have good reasons to be cautious in terms of approaching this world of crypto, but we've passed that stage. Crypto is just because it's not regulated in all jurisdictions doesn't mean it's illegal, and that's something that we always have to clarify from a conversational perspective. And because it's regulated, it also doesn't mean that it's foolproof, right? Nothing in this world is foolproof. So there's some certain risks that exist that will always continue to exist in life. But what crypto does, especially because of the technology, it allows for us to rethink certain operations and evolve as we evolve with this world, just like how you have AI, etc., etc. Crypto is the evolution of money. Like, if it's not going to go anywhere, you need to get comfortable with that. And if you're familiar with the concept of cash is king, then explore the second question: who would be the heir to that cash? Who would succeed that? We had mobile money, right? And coming to the question now about mobile money, we've had banks, we had mobile money, and now we had at this reiteration of crypto. And I would really say that it's not a mobile money versus crypto versus bank. It's about financial inclusion, right? What makes sense to that individual in that village versus that individual in that city high-rising versus that individual in that suburban area. We need to create a financial industry where everybody is welcome. All technologies are embraced. All systems function together. It's interoperability. I want to be able to change from different assets at different points in time to different means based on my scenario. And crypto is the best conduit for moving of value, the transfer of value. And mobile money, I think it has its own limitations, and it had its own use cases as well when it was introduced into the Africa remit. And again, there's so many considerations. There's internet penetration. There's how many people have mobile access to internet and mobile phones. What about banking infrastructures? How secure is a country's banking infrastructure? South Africa, we're privileged to have a very robust and strong banking infrastructure that we weren't really reliant on, or the mobile money market never really took flight as much as it did in other jurisdictions like Kenya with M-Pesa. Uganda, East Africa, but what you do see is that there's still this large population of unbanked individuals, right? And I think there was a study where it showed, what was the growth rate between how many bank accounts are there in Africa specifically, how many mobile money wallets are there in Africa, and how many crypto wallets are there in Africa. And they segmented it per country, and they basically showed the growth rate in terms of how long did it take for there to be 500 million bank accounts versus mobile money. And you find that there's an exponential change in terms of how adoption took place. And crypto, we're at the third reiteration of this transfer of value phenomenon that we've been trying to solve as humans since the beginning of time. How do we account this ledger that Herman was talking about, that Bitcoin demonstrates so purely,
Yeah.
that it's immutable, of giving a complete account of a transaction without any interference or any other actors perhaps being able to manipulate the journal, the ledger. That is where the technology element then obviously becomes a bit more relevant. So in terms of mobile money markets, entities and enterprises like Safaricom, in terms of the various banks right across the world, specifically in South Africa and Africa, we don't see it as us or them. In fact, we need them to create this ecosystem, because as an exchange, Binance, I want to say we're a bit I want to say token agnostic. Bitcoin obviously is always top number one. I guess you always have your favorites, your Ethereum, your BNB, etc. But ultimately it's about serving a user base, right? What they want to do, how they want to get access to the market, what we can enable them and facilitate for them. That's our purpose, our journey, so to say. And yeah, we look forward and actually embrace still working with mobile money wallet operators as well as banks in terms of finding solutions that best suit and are tailored to a user's need at that point in time.
Cool. Herman, there's a couple of things here for you. Firstly, I don't want to touch the idea of why we distinguish Bitcoin differently from crypto and why that's important. That's all you. But just speaking from your experience as someone who is onboarding new users all the time, you're paying out staff in Bitcoin. Cindy may ask, if someone gets their salary paid in crypto, how do they purchase something at the shop who doesn't have the option to pay with crypto? So first talk us through why you distinguish Bitcoin as different from the other crypto currencies, the other tokens, and then just talk Cindy through what's happening with how your staff uses their salaries.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think we're looking at the same questions in the chat here. I mean, look, there's many differences between Bitcoin and crypto, but I think the most important one, and the one that is most relevant, is the fact that, I mean, look, Bitcoin was not actually the first attempt at doing what it does. There's a long history behind Bitcoin, and several elements of the Bitcoin network were invented in the 80s and the 70s, going as far back as computer science goes back. It's not as if Bitcoin was the first successful attempt to do this, but when Satoshi launched the Bitcoin white paper, or released the Bitcoin white paper, and then released the code, there were very few positive responses, and this is because the early cryptocurrency community, when you call them that, were disillusioned with the idea that it's even technically possible to create a decentralized digital form of money. And I think that played into Bitcoin's favor, because when Satoshi launched Bitcoin, very few people actually thought it would work. And so by the time it became clear that this thing was working, the code had escaped the control of the early developer community, who were in many ways sort of, exercising dictatorial control over the network. I mean, in the very early days, Satoshi could do to the Bitcoin network whatever he wanted to. He could roll out updates, he could change the code, he could do whatever he wanted to. And Gavin Andresen, who came after him, could do very similar, in very similar ways, could do something like that. He could fork the network if he wanted to. And both of them actually were kind of pushed aside by the early community that formed around Bitcoin. Satoshi was to some extent pushed aside, and so was Gavin Andresen. And this is how Bitcoin became more and more decentralized. And it's really important to distinguish between Bitcoin and the rest of crypto when it comes to this feature of decentralization. It's not that I'm against innovation. That's not the reason for being a Bitcoin maximalist. It's identifying the crucial and important differences between what is money and what is not money. There are many projects. There are many projects that use the same technology that Bitcoin introduced to the world to do other things. There's a decentralized communications platform called Nostr that I've been using for the past 3 years. that uses many of the same cryptographic tools that Bitcoin launched. And so it's not that I think there will be no other. The technology that Bitcoin introduced to the world will be used to do other things. But when it comes specifically to money, what's important is that it's decentralized. You don't want to keep your wealth in something that's under the control of a few people. That's precisely the problem with central banking. And that's precisely why Satoshi created Bitcoin. Bitcoin was created in 2008 and launched in 2009 specifically as a response against central banking. And Satoshi recognized that the basic problem is the centralization of control. So the answer to that is decentralization. And I think decentralization is the most important difference between Bitcoin and crypto. Most of the other large cryptocurrencies are under the control of either private companies or foundations or board of directors that can, to large extent, influence what does and what does not happen on the network. Whereas with Bitcoin, there really is no central force that can exercise any control over the network. And that makes updates on the Bitcoin network quite messy and quite difficult, but that's precisely the point. It's precisely the point that it is difficult to change. And it's crucial to understand that differentiation between the two. So I think that sort of answers that. I mean, and specifically when it comes to circular economy building and introducing this kind of thing into the environment that we're in. You know, if you're dealing with very sophisticated people and people who have degrees in education and so on and so forth, it's entirely okay, I would say, to introduce them to this thing and let them go wild and experiment and figure out for themselves. But if you're dealing with communities where people struggle to read and write, you have to approach this very differently. You cannot give a person who cannot read, you know, an internet connected phone and say, you know, there, go and gamble your money away, because they're not able to do the research for themselves. You have to guide them. And to a large extent, that is the case for most, you know, ordinary people. Most normal people will never audit the code and figure out for themselves what precisely is the difference between these different cryptocurrencies. They'll take the word of other people. You know, and so I think it's important to help people understand that there is an important difference. I think the second question, what was your second question?
It was about how does your staff actually use their salaries that gets paid in Bitcoin at outlets like outside of Pick n Pay that don't accept Bitcoin?
Well, I mean, so look, our staff members are all recruited from the same community where we recruit the children into our nonprofit. So it's a very small community-based nonprofit organization. We've got daily programs for about 60, 70 kids. And we've got a staff of about 20 people that run the organization, including myself. And everyone lives in the same community other than myself and one other person. And so we've onboarded, I mean, I live nearby, about 10 minutes away. But so we've onboarded about 50 businesses in that community to accept Bitcoin as payment. And this is not done through a platform or any sort of middleman. It's all peer-to-peer. And so the shops where they spend most of their salaries at have been onboarded to accept Bitcoin. So I think that's basically the answer to the question. It's like, yeah, of course, you can't spend money to buy stuff if the shop that you're spending at does not accept it as a form of payment. You know, if you have gold coins in your back pocket, that's not going to be very useful if you want to walk into a grocery store and buy stuff, you know. So you have to go out and onboard the businesses first, and it's a slow, gradual process. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. I mean, this is what I always tell people: is Bitcoin is not an app. It's not something that takes flame and then spreads over the internet and goes viral overnight. Bitcoin is money, and money changes. Money changes very slowly. If you go back and you look at the introduction of credit cards, it did not happen overnight where people started using credit cards to pay for stuff. People were skeptical in the beginning, and it took years. And that's not even a new type of money. That's just a new form of payment. You know, if you look at the transition from the gold standard to fiat money, today we live entirely in a fiat world. There is no single currency on the planet that's still backed by gold. But the concept of gold as money is so strong and so deeply ingrained in people's minds that if you go out to the average person on the street, and this is also one of the questions we have in the chat, if you go out to the average person on the street and you ask them, well, what gives your money value? You'd be surprised by how many people still think that fiat currencies are backed by gold, which is completely not the case at all. And this speaks to the fact that money as a concept and money as a human technology that's thousands of years old changes very, 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 very slowly. And so it's not going to happen overnight where you'll be able to all of a sudden spend your Bitcoin at any place around the country. It's going to happen slowly but surely as people migrate from one form of money to another, because slowly but surely they're learning that there is a better form of money out there that does not lose value on an annual basis.
So are you still converting to like stable coins and then cashing out? Or how are you getting, like, if you need to pay for your car service or whatever, how are you doing that transaction?
I mean, me personally, I spend about 70% of what I spend on a daily basis in Bitcoin. The other 30%, yeah, unfortunately, I do have to cash out. But I try and onboard the people, you know, the services, the goods and services that I need. I try and onboard them to accept Bitcoin. I mean, I've been working on my local mechanic for the last 2 years trying to get him to accept Bitcoin. But there's a mechanic on the other side of town that is ready to accept it as payment. So, you know, I sort of rotate between the two.
Okay, cool. And when you're cashing out, like, how do you help your staff avoid some of the tax hits, the capital gains, those tax events being triggered when they transacting?
I mean, most of our staff, I'd say, you know, I think it's definitely more than 90% of our staff are recruited from the same township where we recruit the children. The children from, and so we're talking about very low income individuals. We don't employ highly educated people with degrees and so on and so forth. It's a youth empowerment program that's focused on, you know, marginalized communities. So I think most of the people who work for us earn below the tax bracket. So we haven't really run into that problem yet. There is one person that works for the organization that does earn a salary where he has to declare tax, but we have an accountant who've been educating on Bitcoin for the last couple of years, and he sort of found a way to how can I put it, reconcile the two worlds. So I mean, he deals with such on behalf of the people who do have to. And I would highly recommend, if you do have to, I mean, there's questions about tax in the chat here.
Yeah,
I would highly recommend, if tax is a question that you or is something, a topic that you have questions about, you have to go to a tax professional. Not a cryptocurrency or Bitcoin professional. You should go to someone that understands the tax law of South Africa and rather educate that person on Bitcoin so that they can take the Bitcoin and crypto knowledge into the tax world, not the other way around. If that makes sense.
Cool. Now, I think the next one, the third Decrypting Crypto webinar, that's going to be all about the tax situation. I'm probably going to have Ian Olivier from Mazars on here, and then I would love to speak to your accountant, Herman. But just for Larry, you working across territories, Pan-Africa. Peter asks about the anonymity of crypto and facilitation of crime. I know there were like 2 studies that came out quite recently that showed an absolute decline across all metrics in crypto-driven crime. But what are some of the key things users need to know just from a legal and consumer protection standpoint? And what recourse does a person have if they fall victim to a scam?
Yeah. So taking maybe a step back and kind of just also give an insight to our ecosystem. We work with law enforcement agencies. In fact, we have a whole team in Binance that are special investigators, ex-Interpol, ex-Europol officers. So we do our bit in terms of fighting crime and making sure bad actors stay off our platform and assisting legal authorities in various jurisdictions in terms of actually catching those bad actors and stopping those bad actors. I mean, me personally, I've dealt with various cases from kidnappings to divorce settlements to absolutely every possible shape or form of how this product can be misused.
Yeah.
And something that I can say testament in terms of, say, where this helps beyond an anonymity perspective is that because of the ledger being immutable, because once a crypto transaction takes place, you can't undo it, you can't remove it off the blockchain, you can't make it disappear. There's very smart people that can find individuals, from IP tracing to finding out the hashtag and following transaction. You have chain analysis, you have other industry players that are able to identify and locate people who might have tried to, you know, circumvent the law and make themselves as anonymous as possible, and you know, using mule accounts, etc., and they still get caught. Eventually you will get caught, and that's because of the underlying technology behind it. And I think that's what we forget about what crypto enables. And I compare that against fiat cash in your hand. The anonymous nature of cash is actually more dangerous, I would put, than crypto. Because if I come into your office, Lindsay, with 100,000 Rand, you don't know where I came with cash. You don't know where that cash came from. I'll tell you it's my savings or whatever the case is. But once I give that to you and you do something else with it and that chain continues, you don't know where that cash comes from. You don't have an underlying technology where you can trace on the numbers and say, oh, this cash came from this batch over here. And you don't have that in today's real world. But with crypto that gives more security. So again, maybe talking to the people that were a bit hesitant in or not as confident in crypto. With crypto, you get security unparalleled, security that's not available in traditional banking ecosystems currently. So that's a benefit that you get. I think Hammond was also talking about, you know, the comparisons between, from a legal perspective at least, there's certain characteristics that require something to be considered money, and, you know, the underlying value. And I just want to say, like, if you really put fiat and crypto for like, the only different thing that you really realize is the trust component, that you trust the monetary policy that runs the money system, the legal tender system. You trust the thinking of the governor and the team behind him that keeps our framework ticking. You're right. Whereas with crypto, you kind of find that kind of supplemented like through the white paper, which is coded, and you know, you understand how the technology works behind it. But then you also have the community, because that's something, I mean, if you really rewind the clock, not everybody, we didn't start off just trusting banks immediately. I think Haman also touched on, you know, the evolution with the credit card. Like, there's so many technologies where we found ourselves at this point in time, where we now found ourselves with crypto, where we asked the question of, you know, what is crypto? Why crypto? We think it's going to pass. We don't trust it. And then time lapses, and then before you know it, it's a daily thing. It's part of life. And that's what I really encourage in saying that, you know, crypto is not going anywhere. Get comfortable with that. And also understand that not everything in crypto is for everyone. So there's things for retail users, there's things for business solutions that crypto solves for, you know, and that's where maybe the remittance conversation comes in, because businesses also struggle with cash in terms of making sure that cash comes back so that they stay liquid, so they can continue operations. There's so many other problems that crypto solves for, and it's just, you need to lean into it. I wanted to just give a personal example. For instance, I would take some of my salary that I receive in fiat, right, in cash, and I would send that to my crypto, my Binance wallet, and I would use that. That would be, for me and my wife, that would be our grocery pocket. So we always shop at Pick and Pay, and we'll use crypto to buy groceries, and that would be the case. It would be nice as more use cases unfold, and stay tuned. There will be more where we're working with strategic partners in terms of trying to cryptify South Africa, and you'll see that very shortly. And then we can start to add in more use cases. I want to be able to cut my hair using crypto. I want to be able to go and buy a nice pair of shoes or sneakers, which you can. There's certain sneaker shops that do that. And I think what Haman has created in you know, the Bitcoin world, you kind of want to see that. You want to see that right through society, right? I guess I'm a bit more agnostic by saying, you know, it can be different coins, it can be different cryptocurrencies, depending on what your risk appetite is, because everything's, you know, volatility is volatility. But that's where we are going, and that's an exciting future to be part of. I think just one more comment I wanted to make is that there's also this misconception, or I think we sometimes forget the fact that fiat is just as volatile, or can be as volatile as cryptocurrencies. I mean, if you just look into the African region, you find that currencies still fluctuate very, very broadly. Currencies are still very unstable. So when you put that into perspective and you're saying, okay, which volatility is best managed? And if I say which volatility is best managed, then you can kind of see why crypto becomes, now you can start seeing what the advantages are of trading and using crypto on a day-to-day basis.
Okay. Yeah, that's cool. Herman, there's a lovely question here from Steve, like practically how are fractions of crypto created, bought and sold? That's kind of more on the trading side, but there's an interesting little quirk to that I just wanted to gauge your temperature on. So Australia is starting to mess around with CBDC, so central bank digital currency. There's been talks of trying to develop a digital rand. So like there's all these like stable coin kind of off-ramping, and then like rather trading in that instead of like your Bitcoin like asset. Where do you stand on flipping Bitcoin, or like keeping Bitcoin and then using like your gains and flipping it to either stable coins or then to like these digital like CBDCs?
I mean, this is not financial advice.
This is not financial. I just want to hear like someone who's educating people of how to work with things, and all these messages coming to their marketing kind of like, you can use this for remittance, and you can like pay your auntie or at least your family back in Zimbabwe. It's like this stable coin and just moving money around. What's your personal feeling around that? And I know it also leans into what I think I'm trying to coax out of you here is just your idea of like ownership in the crypto space.
I mean, I'm not sure if you want to ask me that question on a live webinar, but okay, let's go for it. Look, man, I don't know if you were aware of this, but Martin Luther King nailed his manifesto on the door of a church on the 31st of October. And it's the same day that Satoshi Nakamoto published the white paper. And the reason I mentioned this, both 31st of October, which also happens to be Halloween, I think. The reason I say this is because the way to answer your question is that I believe that the separation of money and state is the single most important reason to be involved in this space. And this is why I have a deep disdain for CBDCs. I believe that they are a surveillance tool, and they're not necessarily going to stop the criminals that we want to stop, because the biggest criminals in the world are the ones printing the money to finance wars. As far as I'm concerned, obviously there are people that use crypto on a daily basis to commit all kinds of illicit activities. I'm well aware of this. I've been following the work of Chain Analysis since they first launched as a company some time ago, and there's been some interesting applications of what they do. But the fact of the matter is, the crimes that ordinary everyday people commit using cryptocurrencies and the so-called anonymous nature of crypto, which is I mean, there are one or two cryptocurrencies out there that are truly anonymous, Monero being the most popular one. But Bitcoin and most of other cryptocurrencies are pseudonymous. They're not actually anonymous. And so if there is any link between the real world identity and any crypto transaction, it's very, very easy to trace. If that was not the case, then companies like Chain Analysis would not exist. Anyway, these illicit activities that are committed using crypto is petty crime compared to what central banks are doing around the world by printing money and paying for things like wars. I mean, you just have to take a very superficial look at the state of the US government finances and ask yourself the question, where was most of that money spent? The wars in Afghanistan and Iraq cost them trillions and trillions of dollars, and it was a largely useless war that created more misery and suffering than anything else that anybody has ever done with any cryptocurrency. So this is why I believe in the separation of money and state, and CBDCs are the antithesis of that. CBDCs are the complete and final merger of money and state, where it gives the state full and total control over what goes on in your personal financial life.
Yeah.
And so if there's any sort of reason for you to demonstrate or protest against something that the government is doing that you don't agree with, which should be a right in any democratic society, you should fear CBDCs like nothing else. Because the first thing that governments do when they don't like what protesters are doing is they switch off their bank accounts. And CBDCs will give governments a level of control over that, unlike anything we've ever seen before. To your second question with regards to stablecoins, I mean, I know that there are some utility for stablecoins, but I've never found a need for that. I can achieve the same thing on Bitcoin. I can keep my Bitcoin value stable relative to fiat if I really want to, which I don't. But a lot of our staff do that. So we would pay them in Bitcoin, and there's one of the wallets that we use called Blink Wallet, which is a great product, where they don't need to use stablecoins in order to hold their Bitcoin at a stable fiat value. So that is possible. That is possible to do. It's made largely possible by the Bitcoin second layer network called Lightning Network, which we haven't even touched on, but that's probably one of the most important things to understand when you're talking about the daily use of Bitcoin, because very little of that happens on chain. Most of it is off chain on Lightning. So you can hold it stable relative to fiat quite easily. It's super easy to do if you know which wallet to download.
Do you have like a 20-second explainer for like Lightning?
No, I don't, but I can try. Look, if you look at the internet, the basic protocols that the internet runs on today, TCP, IP, those sorts of things, were invented way back in the 80s, 70s, and 80s, and we're still using the same technology today. The internet evolved in layers, and so we built layers of communication on top of layers of communication. Money works in a very similar way. The evolution of fiat money started with goldsmiths in the medieval ages, where people didn't want to carry around gold bars, but they wanted to be able to exchange value easily and quickly. And so money also works with layers. You don't use your home loan account to buy a cool drink down at the shop. You use your checking account or cash. So money also functions in layers, and so you could expect cryptocurrencies, or Bitcoin in this case, to evolve in a similar fashion. And so Bitcoin is evolving in layers, and Lightning Network is a second layer of Bitcoin, whereas the primary Bitcoin layer, which is on the base layer, the blockchain where coins are mined, this is a very slow and expensive layer, but there's a good reason for that, but we don't have time for that now. The second layer is basically just a layer on top of the first layer, and that's where transactions take place most of the time. And we'll likely see third layers and fourth layers. And it's interesting to see a lot of the things that could be done on other coins moving onto the Lightning Network, such as stable coins, for example, because ultimately you want that base layer security to be as decentralized as possible. So anyway, that's not 20 seconds, but that's as short as I can make it.
Yeah, because you went into the whole gold bars thing, but I think it's important foundational knowledge. And then just like we kind of need to wrap it up, I'm being told here. Just looking ahead, Larry, over the next few years, you obviously took a lot of what Herman said too hard, because you came from the SARB, came over to an exchange. But what is the single most important development that we're going to see, be it educational, technological, regulatory, that needs to unlock, that's going to just unlock this whole wider crypto utility, and just push the community into the true mainstream?
Yeah, look, why I switched from a regulator to Binance to an exchange was actually, funny enough, for the same philosophical reasons. I joined the Reserve Bank because I thought, everyone's got a gift and a skill, and you want to use that as best as possible to serve your community. I don't take an as extreme view and think that all central banks are evil, and I say that not lightly, because the atrocities that Herman was talking about, it's not anything you can ignore, but I think Africa has unique problems and have different situations. And with my engagements with various central banks, like from Ghana to Kenya, right across Africa, you realize that there's a new age of central bankers that are emerging, right? Just as you can imagine the gray hairs that were there 30, 20, 40 years ago through natural process is changing. And we have an opportunity as the crypto community to also educate regulators, and the new regulators that we're dealing with, they get it. They understand why this is important for the people. Like the type of legislation that's being passed is not as perhaps as draconian or onerous as you look at the banking law that was developed back in 100 years ago. It's something that's catered for the people. It's something that involves people, community participation. So we get to shape what that legislation and regulation looks like. And that then also builds into the utility conversation in terms of what we can do. Are we actually driving innovation, etc.? And are we actually solving real world problems? And that's where I take a slightly nuanced view and say that there is need for central bank, because some of the oversight that they do actually assist with is something that looks at a wider grouping of people, right? And there's certain protection and safety that comes from the measures that they do in terms of trying to manage and stabilize the economy from different actors. I think if we were in this utopia of where crypto was widely adopted, their relevance might become a bit more narrow. But at this point in time, this juncture where we are, they serve a critical function in terms of managing our economy, especially the South African Reserve Bank, which is the oldest reserve bank. They've played such an instrumental part for keeping South Africa as the powerhouse in the African continent that every single African jurisdiction looks up to South Africa for. So I don't want to take away the good work of the current ecosystem. And that's where I always drive the message to say that we're here to supplement that. We're here to add another layer to this financial world where we can better solve for people's problems. In terms of what's coming up, I want to kind of maybe direct you a bit to Binance and say that we also have a Web3 wallet. We have a lot of cool things that's coming up. I mean, we have integrated AI with our app. So for those that are perhaps not as literate or not understanding the space, you can just chat to it like a normal AI bot. You'll be able to move around the app and see what you can do. There's marketplace with different merchants. You can from online shopping to e-hailing services. And again, this is if you're traveling as well, you find that the economy is bigger than just South Africa. You can send some money into your crypto wallet and then or buy some crypto assets and then exchange that in different jurisdictions where you might be traveling. Right, the world is much bigger than what we think it is. I think being able to pay with crypto, being able Binance Square, which we have, which is a community for a lot of content and media. If you want to get into that things, we have Binance Academy from an educational perspective. But I'm kind of trying to bring in that crypto is bigger than just money going in, money going out. There's community. We have Binance meetups where we get to meet each other, like see who's the traders on the other side when you're doing your P2P transactions. We invite regulators to these engagements to say, come and see the community that you want to regulate. See what their needs are, see what their concerns are, see what their fears are, and start regulating from that perspective. And that's what we try and bring to the community. In terms of what's next, where I'm not a prophet or anything like that, but I do think that this adoption will, the biggest event that will get our adoption to where we need to be is regulation. And regulation is coming in fast. Africa is slightly behind the Western world in terms of the adoption of crypto, right? But I think we're sitting on a pivotal point where we have this massive opportunity as the African continent, with South Africa being the leader, in terms of really creating this into something that makes sense for us. I see time. I'm conscious of that. I'm just going to pause there.
No, I just want to stop
other questions.
The promotion. He's a beloved partner, but this wasn't about the marketing pitch. But I think it's very important what you said, and I think like if regulators could go to communities like the ones that Herman is involved in, the ones that are spawned like from that movement, I think it will be very important. And to answer your question, Cindy May, how does one person, a layperson, buy or invest in Bitcoin? You subscribe to Crypto Corner, the newsletter. If you go to the newsletter section in yes, it is powered or supported by Binance. At Daily Maverick, you'll find me there, and every Thursday at some stage in your inbox. Just to close, Herman, if there's just one takeaway message that the audience can take from this, what is it?
I see a lot of questions in this chat, and I wish I had time to sit down with every single person who were asking the questions in this chat. And there's lots of great questions, and I completely understand why people have these questions. And I love it when people ask questions, because one of the big things that I find in this space is that a lot of people feel they don't want to sound stupid, and so they'd rather not ask than ask. And so I encourage people to ask questions, because there is so much unfamiliarity in the space. It's such a new technology. We're talking about a paradigm shift, and so the vast majority of people are still trying to figure out what's going on here. And so asking questions is a great thing. And I'm not, I want to encourage people, if you do have these kinds of questions, there are many things that you can do. You can go to meetups. Larry mentioned some of the meetups that they do. I would also like to encourage people. We do a non-profit conference every year in Cape Town, Adopting Bitcoin Cape Town. We don't make any money out of this. I'm a co-organizer for that conference. I volunteer my time to do it. We're doing the 3rd edition of the event in January next year. And these are exactly the kind of questions people can come and ask at that event. And you can talk to people in person and get a real human being to answer you and have a conversation with you on a normal, ordinary level. The conference is focused on everyday adoption. It's not focused on complicated technical conversations that most people won't understand. It's focused on questions like this. Where do I get involved? Where can I spend it? How do I safeguard it? The types of questions that ordinary people will ask. So that's a great place to come and ask questions. It'll be in January 2026. It's a 3rd edition of the event in the waterfront in Cape Town, Adopting Bitcoin Cape Town. And if you do come, I'll answer every single question you can ask, because I think that's what people should do. People should be asking questions. That's the only way to learn and figure things out. Ask questions. Don't stop asking.
Yeah, and come to the gathering. It's happening later this year. Daily Mavericks flagship event. Binance is going to be there. I'll be there. I will also answer as many questions as I can. I might get Herman on the phone just to answer the things that I'm less sure about. But yeah, keep it locked to Daily Maverick. We are supporting the crypto community as best we can, partnered with Binance. Thanks, guys. Thank you for making this possible.
Thank you.